Okay, well, we have Dr. Dennis Bradford here with us, and Dennis and I met in an unusual way, but it was a divine appointment. Somehow, we had both been placed on some sort of life coaching call center, which I never placed myself on. But he found my name on, and there was some sort of confusion. And so what I did was I called this strange call center to find out what it was about, thinking, why is my name on here? I never signed up for this. What is this? And because I had made the call, my number got into the database. And then soon after, Dennis called me and said, hi, I see you're looking for a life coach. And I said, well, no, I'm not. I was actually just trying to find out what this thing is where my name is on here. I've never signed up. So that sparked a whole several-hour conversation. He's a philosopher. He knows David Hawkins, and we just talked on and on and on about so many wonderful things and sages. And so we became fast friends by that random, you all know that I don't believe anything is random, by that divine appointment. So I always laugh because you just never know who's going to be on the other line when you pick it up and where that will lead. And I've been so grateful to know Dennis, to get to learn more and more about him, and have him here, to bring him here today to share his thoughts and wisdom with us. So we are going to skip over a bio just to shake things up a little, because we're going to be really looking at what is identity. So I invite you in for a moment just to center into a moment of prayer and mindfulness, and take a deep inward breath if that feels good for you, and breathe in all the goodness, gratitude, love. And when you think you've reached the top, take it just a little smidge higher and hold, and then release. Exhale all that no longer serves your highest and best life. And just tune within to that I am presence, that where you are one with the divine intelligence, you are one with God, nature, you are in your fullest essence, truth and beauty and love and magnificence. And see if you can just take a moment to tune into that bright, shining light. And maybe with that light, you want to walk into a meadow and sit in the middle of the grassy field with that light, just communing with that deeper sense of yourself. Or maybe you're on a bench sitting next to a stream or a creek, hearing the water, and you're really taking that time to tune into that core essential self. Or maybe you're on the beach with your toes in the sand. Wherever you are, take a minute to tune deeply into that inner voice, that inner wisdom, that divine core essential self that is complete, whole, and perfect. And say yes. Say yes. Yes to my goodness, to my greatness. As we bring ourselves back into this moment, let us cover our blessings over Dennis Bradford today, knowing that there is a divine message moving in, through, and as him, and we are open to receive the message through the lens that we are here to see it through, to impact our lives in immeasurable ways. And so I release this word into the great expanse of love, in love, for love, and as love. And so it is. Amen. Ashe. Namaste, people. So grateful that you're here with us. I'm going to hand the screen over to Dennis now, and Dennis is going to take it away. Dennis, we're so grateful for your time with us.
Did you ever wonder how identity crises are possible? When we were teenagers, think back, it may have been years of identity crisis, because at least if you were like me, I had no clue what I was doing. I had my first identity crisis at 18, and let's see if you can relate to that. I went off to college. I was fortunate to be able to do that. I don't know why people go to college. I don't understand why people do what they do. I don't understand why I do what I do half the time. I think people go to college because they believe that it's going to prepare them to live better in the future. Well, I went to college with one assumption, and the assumption was if life is worth living, it's worth living well. Why would you bother? Why would you go through the pain and the suffering if you didn't get something good out of it? And I think that other people are like that, and I'm going to hope that you're like that. I grew up in the 60s, and I was 18. And about then, the anthem of the 60s was, I think, the Rolling Stones, I can't get no satisfaction. It's actually not quite true. You can get some temporary satisfaction, but you can't get very satisfaction that lasts very long. And it certainly doesn't last 50 or 100 years. And I didn't know what to do to live well. And that's what I went off to college trying to figure out. At least, and I'll give myself credit for this, I knew that I didn't know. I knew a lot of things I didn't want to do with my life, but I didn't know what I did want to do with my life. I knew a little bit about Plato, but that was all I knew about philosophy. If you've read, there's my little bio somewhere, and I know it was submitted to somewhere, so Amy put it out. And you may have seen the word philosopher and not really understood what that is. A philosopher is a lover of wisdom. That's what the word means. You can look it up. That's the etymology of the word. According to Plato, Socrates said that the, quote, sense of wonder is the mark of the philosopher. Philosophy, indeed, has no other origin, end quote. So a philosopher is a lover of wisdom. And once we have that idea, we have the idea that there are three kinds of people: non-philosophers, as yet unsuccessful philosophers, and sages who are successful philosophers. They are the ones who actually make it. Amy mentioned Dr. Hawkins. According to his map of consciousness, about 1/2% of people are sages. That's not very many people out of 100. It's less than half a person out of 100. About 9 out of 10 are in the wrong ballgame. I guess that means they're non-sages, or they're non-philosophers. One of the things that I'm grateful for Amy to have said to me is that I helped her with her identity. Because, and this happened to a lot of students, they realized that they're philosophers, but they didn't have a category for that. She already figured out that she was trying to live well, didn't know how, and that made her a philosopher because she was doing it seriously. And that's all philosophy is. Now, I said that to say this: I'm not a sage. I'm here because Amy had a cancellation and needed somebody to fill in. So don't expect me to recommend what you should think or what you should do or anything like that. That's not what my business here is. I'm a philosopher, yes, but I'm as yet unsuccessful one. Now, are you a philosopher? Well, if you're serious about living well, you are, whether you've studied it or not. And one of the points I want to make is that don't confuse being a philosopher with having studied it in the academy. Yes, it's a discipline in the academy. I spent 32 years teaching it. And in a sense, anybody who teaches it, I suppose, is, but really, there's a difference. You can be a philosopher without ever having studied it. You can be a professor of philosophy and not be a philosopher, which rather surprised me. And if you have any experience with philosophy, you may remember it giving you headaches because you had to think so hard, because it involves serious fundamental thinking, especially around identity, by the way, because identity judgments are constitutive of the worlds in which we live. I'm not going to approach identity in terms of identity judgments or logic, like predicative identity judgments versus identity judgments and so on. Basically, an identity judgment is just a 2-in-1 judgment. And I'll give you a radical example if you want one. Look at let's say you're in front of a table, touch the table with your finger, look at it. And now the table that you're touching, is it the table that you're seeing? After all, the visual object has a color, but the tactile object, qua-tactile object, doesn't have a color. Now, you just assume that the things that you see are the things that you touch. You just assume that they're real. But you may never have looked at it that way. That's how fundamental identity judgments are. But let's not approach it from that aspect. Let's approach it from a personal crisis. Søren Kierkegaard was a philosopher who flourished in the 1840s and 50s. He was a Dane, and he was quite anti-intellectual in the sense of anti-professor. He didn't like Hegel, was a big philosopher then, and he was an anti-Hegelian. And he knew perfectly well that a lot of people are philosophers and a lot of professors of philosophy are not philosophers. And here is how he describes an identity crisis. I'll read it to you. Do you ask yourself questions like this? Quote from Kierkegaard: where am I? Who am I? How came I here? What is this thing called the world? What does the world mean? How did I come into the world? Why was I not consulted? How did I obtain an interest in this big enterprise they call reality? Why should I have an interest in it? It is not a voluntary concern. And if I'm compelled to take part in it, where is the director? End quote. Also, we might say, what am I? What should I do now that I'm here? What will become of me? Is it possible to become a sage? Is it possible, in other words, to live well? If so, how? These are important questions, and they're difficult to answer. They're often referred to as the existential questions, because if you don't answer them one way, it leads to suicide. It's difficult to think clearly about fundamental issues. There are reasons for that, and the reasons is that the analogies that we use to understand are very limited. And I'm going to read here one of my favorite quotes. This is from the writer Cavett Robert. When you think of life, approaching it from the point of view of a personal identity crisis and the kinds of trying to answer the kinds of questions that Kierkegaard just went over, you can have some sympathy with this quote. I love it. Quote: most people are walking around, umbilical cord in hand, looking for a new place to plug it in. End quote. They want someone to take over. It may be political, social, sexual, all kinds of different ways. We want somebody to tell us what to do. You really become a philosopher when you realize there's nobody to tell you what to do. You have to stand on your own 2 feet. The title of this talk, what did I call it? You are more than you think. Let's at least unpack you and thinking. And by the way, I have about 200 minutes prepared, and I've got about 15 minutes to talk. So this isn't going to be long, but I want to give you a resource and that I put up in the last week just for you if you want to use it. Go to endfearfast.com/resources. Endfearfast, endfearfast.com/resources. There's a lot of free resources there. So I may say some things that stimulate you. If so, that'd be great, because I know I'm going to leave some things out. I'm not even going to attempt to cover most of what is relevant here, but I have a lot of free material there if you want to follow up on any of these things, and it's there for you and it doesn't cost a penny. So, all right, let's go to thinking. What is thinking? Thinking is conceptualizing. To think is to conceptualize. A concept is a principle of classification. That means it's a principle of sorting or dividing or categorizing. If you walk into the barnyard and you have the concept of chickenness, you can sort the barnyard animals into those that are chickens and those that aren't chickens. That's a concept. That's all it is. It's that simple. That's what thinking does. It separates. Now, what are you? And what's the importance of that, linking that to thinking? Well, if I were an alien who could speak English and popped in Earth from outer space and asked you, what are you? You'd say, I'm a human being. And you'd be right. Of course, you're right in thinking that you're a human person. That's true. You are an animal, a psychophysical animal separated from other animals and other beings and so on. That's what you are. I think of it as an animated skin bag. You're an animated skin bag, a living one, just like me. And here's the problem with personal identity. We tend to identify only with that animated skin bag. That's the real problem. Because when you do that, you're missing most of your real identity. That's the difference between a superficial assay of personal identity and one of depth. If you're familiar with David Hawkins, anybody who has a consciousness level of 499 or below makes that mistake, and that's most people. In fact, most people have a consciousness level below 200. But according to Hawkins, if you understand there's a 1,000 level logarithmic scale from 1 to 1,000, and most people calibrate below 499. And what that means in terms of personal identity is they are stuck egocentrically looking at the world as if they were only an animated skin bag. Here's the problem. And it's a problem of self-esteem. Maybe this is an easy way to put it. Do you like yourself? You love yourself? If so, you have a positive self-esteem. Do you hate yourself? Do you dislike yourself? If so, you have a negative or low self-esteem. How is it even possible to have a self-esteem? How is it even possible to have an identity crisis? How can that possibly work? How can we explain identity crises are possible if we are only animated skin bags? And that's the only idea I want to throw out there for you to wonder about. How is that even possible? And I suggest that it's not possible because there's already a duality or split within you. There's the I who's doing the evaluating and the I who's being evaluated. Well, which are you? Or are you two? And if you're two, notice this, that all dissatisfaction, all misery, all suffering comes from separation. If you're separated from yourself, you must live in dissatisfaction. You must live and you must suffer. It's that simple. Notice that if you are not two and there's no separation, then at least in theory, it's possible for there to be no dissatisfaction. And I suggest to you that what most of us do is we think of ourselves as nothing more than animated skin bags, and we try to make a success of things, and we tinker around the edges. And we try to become a little healthier or a little more loving or a little more caring or make a little more money or whatever our interests are. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We have successes and we have failures, and we just simply alternate between the two. We go up and down, up and down, up and down. Nothing gets done. We grow old, we get sick, and we die. In 50 or 100 years from now, you and I will be the same, dust. One of the Buddhist practices concerns death and simply watching a corpse. What happens to a corpse? We know we're going to die. It's only a question of when. And when you become a corpse, everything stops. There's no more animation. There's just that skin bag. Well, if you let it sit out there in the sun and you let the mosquitoes and the animals get at it, pretty soon it'll be a pile of bones. And if you let it sit a little longer, pretty soon those bones are going to be dust. And that's not morbid, that's just a fact. That's where we're all headed. All right. The only question is how are we going to get there? I suggest to you what most of you already know, that it's a mistake And of course, you should take care of yourselves. I'm not saying that as your animated skin bag. Of course, you should take care of that. You should feed it and uh, water it and exercise it and read and try to learn and solve your problems and challenges. I'm not saying that. Of course, you should, but minimize it. And if possible, let it go as much as possible. The more you can let it go, the better it is. If I ask you who you are, what you would likely respond to me with is a story of yourself. Oh, I was born, blah, blah, blah. My parents were such and such. This was my family. This was my native language. I was schooled, yada, yada, yada. I had classmates and friends and lovers, and maybe later on, a wife or husband and children, and so on and so on. And that's what most people identify with. That's a little self, a self with a small s. That's an ego. The problem is that if you think of yourself that way, you never get to any lasting satisfaction, because egos live in becoming, and becoming is the temporal domain. And the temporal domain is in constant flux. A form or an object or a thing is just a limited something that we can single out. You can single out my face right now. All right, it has a certain limitation. If it didn't have any limitations, you couldn't single it out. Becoming is a set of individuals or forms or things or objects in incessant flux, and it's a fascinating flux. And we get entranced with it, and we spend decades trying to become successful within that context. And no matter how successful we become, there's no lasting satisfaction there. There can't be, because it's a temporal domain. But the good thing about being a human being is we can apprehend directly, not conceptually, the domain of being. The domain of being is completely formless. Now, as soon as I say that, there's nothing to single out. There's nothing to think about. It's too simple. We can have direct, non-conceptual apprehension of the domain of being. That's impossible in the domain of becoming. Well, what is wisdom? How can we live well? What does this mean? What it ultimately means is, unless you stop identifying with your small s self, with your animated skin bag, as long as you stay stuck there, you'll never live well. It can't happen. It's impossible for it to happen. If you let go of the identifications, you may think, and it's scary to do it, because you think, I'm going to lose myself. I spent decades trying to improve myself and make it all work well. Well, guess what? You'll never succeed in any lasting way. It can't happen. Being is, as you probably know better than I do, non-temporality. It's no form. It's emptiness. That's what the Buddha talked about it. Tola likes to translate that as spaciousness, which I think is probably a little better way to do it. So I've already burned up my 20 minutes. I haven't even gotten started. This is more like an introduction. Two suggestions at the end. First of all, think of a long-term project of letting go of the little self with a small s. Think of that. Could that be possible? Could it be possible to do that? I happen to believe that the way of non-attachment is the only way to wisdom. And I've tried a lot of different things, and that's the only one that works well. Second, and this we all do, stop thinking of yourself as a little self. You think of yourself as middle-aged or old or young. You think of yourself as tall or short, male or female, blah, 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 blah. All those things are about your animated skin bag. They're not really about you, and your essence is none of that. Stop talking that way. Stop thinking that way. As soon as you catch yourself, just drop it. Just drop it all. I happen to believe that we are one self, united in being, at one with every aspect of reality, and limitless in power, peace, and joy. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, Dennis, thank you so much. Yes, the decorated skin bag that we identify with so so often. It's not necessarily the the identity we're talking about here, right? Well, let's see if anybody has any questions or comments for you today. Good morning, David. Good morning, Luinda and Jennifer and Debbie. Nice to see you here. Good morning, Siggy and Jim. Welcome in, beloved. So grateful to be here with you this morning. This is always a fun conversation, isn't it, about identity and who we really be. I know that's not grammatically correct, but what is our beingness, and not so much all of that, the lists that we can make on our bios, right, or all of the doing things. So yeah, any questions from anybody? Dennis is here to answer any questions or take any comments from you today. It's conversation, I think it's a beautifully deep conversation as human beings, because we can become so hyper focused, myopic on the bag. What did you call the bag? The human body bag that we present to the world. I sometimes say the mask, not the COVID-19 mask, the masks we put onto the world. And so, like, who's really in there? Who are you about, really? And are you allowing that light to shine and be, in your fullest sense? Sometimes my phone is a little slow and sluggish, so I give it a few minutes just to make sure I don't miss anybody's comments or questions. Do you have anything else to add, Dennis, that you're thinking of?
Well, I was thinking of the notion of a person or personality. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that comes from the Greek word meaning mask. That's what made me think of it. It is a mask. And I remember as a kid, I lived in a suburb, and I'd look at all the adults and they all looked good, smelled good, dressed well, and all that kind of stuff. And as I became one, I realized that really is a mask for most people. Most people have no clue what they're doing. And I think what happens is we start asking those questions when we're 13 or 18, and we get distracted by life. And we think that we have to get a job or get married or have a family or serve in the military or whatever it is that we do, whatever our projects are. And they get going, and those questions recede into the background. Well, they don't go away. They're always there. And most people just try their best to distract themselves from them.
Right.
Now, maybe this is too cynical or something, but I think that that's true. And of course, they come back later on. You find yourself on your deathbed, and all of a sudden those questions are looming again. Well, that's not necessary. We have an option. You can get serious about living well when you're on your deathbed and tears are streaming down your cheeks. But that's not a very good option. The better option is do it now when you're alive and healthy and perhaps have a few more years to live and can do it well. And that's a much better option. And it does not involve getting motivated by such an intensity of suffering that you can't sleep at night.
Right.
You can't avoid bursting into tears.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for saying. Okay, a couple of questions and comments have come in. Pat asks, especially since it is the season, every time a message comes in, the feed moves. Okay, bear with me. Especially since it's the season, I like to think that with the small s, every day is Halloween. We all have a costume. Yeah, right, Pat. Ron says, thank you, Dennis. If mutually possible, would you be willing to engage our community in a lengthier dialogue at some point in the future, a workshop dialogue? I would welcome that. Thank you.
Definitely. See, that's one of the problems when you address an audience like this. I don't know the level of the people I'm talking to, and I don't know what I can assume and what I can't assume. I can assume that most of you had identity crises somewhere along the line, and that's what I tried to build on. But beyond that, For example, the logic of identity. There is a logic of identity with 2 and 1 judgments. And I mentioned that briefly. And most philosophers even are quite confused about that. And as long as you stay confused about that, you don't have a real clear understanding of fundamentally the position of yourself in the world. It cannot happen. So at least we can try to straighten out some thinking with a little more time. 15 or 20 minutes is this I said little introduction. You should have seen what I had to start with. I had a few hours worth of material.
I can imagine knowing you. Well, perhaps that's the next step. We'll turn into a workshop or a series of workshops or something like that.
I don't know if people are interested, but my perspective is as a philosopher, a serious philosopher. And I've written books on logic as well as living one too.
I know you can get pretty involved. It's very interesting stuff. Okay, let me see here. Where did the comments go? They were here. Where are they now? Okay, thank you for that, Ron. Luinda says, I am hearing that we are much more than we are aware of or define ourselves as.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you say define, you're talking about an identity judgment. We don't give ourselves enough credit as long as we stay thinking, conceptualizing. And there's a very simple reason why. The simple reason why is no concept can be inclusive of everything. Otherwise, it's not a concept. It doesn't do any conceptual work. It doesn't do any sorting or classifying. And if it doesn't do any sorting or classifying, it's an empty concept. So you can't think being, which is a mistake that many academic philosophers make all the time. They try to think their way to being. I did it myself. Doesn't work. You have to let go of all thinking or conceptualizing. And as soon as you do that, you can grasp or apprehend being non-conceptually. And actually, many people have a spontaneous experience of that, but they don't understand its value and just ignore it. And I believe most adults do, but they just skip over the experience because they don't understand what life is trying to tell them. And I don't know whether that's true or not. I can only speak for myself, really, but that's my guess.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, let's go to Jan. Jan says, Dennis, what protocols, activities, ways of being do you use to support your movement towards self?
There's nothing better than the classic meditation techniques to begin. Nothing better than that. Now, techniques are only techniques. They're good at the beginning, but you need something at the beginning. Two that immediately come to mind are focus on the breathing, because when you're focusing on the inhalations and exhalations, you're not thinking. You're focusing on the inhalations and exhalations. The other one is aliveness, the aliveness in your body, which you may not have ever felt. You may be 70 years old and never have felt the aliveness or energy in your body. And if you'll go to that page that I mentioned, endfearfast.com/resources, the very first one gives you a free training that you can sign up for that I did. It's a webinar training, lasts under 45 minutes, and I will actually teach you one classic meditative technique. And I think it's the best one that combines awareness of breathing and awareness of the aliveness of the body. And I think it's the best. I've taught a lot of people how to meditate, including a lot of prisoners, because I volunteered for many years in prisons, and it works. And if you'll try that, you'll get out of your thinking and you'll say, oh my God, where's this? This is the reaction I had to philosophy when I became a philosopher in college. If I'd have been bright enough and philosophy hadn't existed, I'd have invented it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Same thing with this spirituality stuff, all this woo stuff. Mm-hmm. Oh, what is this stuff? What's going on here? Well, if you will just take some classic, whether it's stilling or moving meditation technique, and get into it, you'll find out oh my goodness, where's this been all my life? That was my reaction to it. And it was like, holy smokes, I missed this somehow. And I actually started with Tai Chi. And yeah, right, Bucko. I'm gonna feel that chi moving, right? And I just didn't buy it, but I did it. And by God, within 2 weeks, holy smokes, where's this been? How could I have no? Well, of course, I was involved in thinking all those years, and I wouldn't let myself out of it. Well, that's what you need. You need a little help to get started. Take a classic meditative technique. It almost doesn't matter which one. Drop all the thinking about it and do it. And if you don't drop the thinking, you'll never do it. You've got to let go of the thinking. And if you're not willing to do that, life is going to keep beating you over the head, and you're going to keep being dissatisfied and suffer until you do. And then you're either going to kill yourself or get busy living well. And to get busy living well, you've got to be willing to drop 80 or 90% of your thinking, which is obstructive, stale, boring, and you wonder why life seems so dead all the time. It's because you're living it from your head. It's because you're thinking too much about it. Anyway,
Thank you,
I get a little
Dennis.
excited about these things because I've learned this personally. And if you haven't yet, if you somehow got on here and haven't learned this yet, it's time. Okay, get your butt on your meditation cushion or whatever you're going to do and do it.
That's why I appreciate you so much. I mean, there's not a day that I talk to Dennis that he is not sitting for his 3 hours. He walks the talk, and it shows, it shows in everything that is fruitful in your life. So thank you for being such a great example.